Hello, everyone, friends and newcomers, listeners far and wide. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, the 9th in this weekly series, our weekly series, coming to you live from Weekapaug, Rhode Island, the ocean state, by the sea, the sparkling, salt-aired sea. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke. Tonight, inviting you, all of us, into places of lightness, of lighterness, to temper some of the heaviness in the world around us, maybe help counter other weightedness or darkness you may feel inside you. There's so much I'm eager to share with you tonight and beyond, and since we're almost at summer and at the summer solstice just upon us in a few days, I've spoken, if you've listened before, that I most often will, on the day of a solstice, an equinox, compose a poem if I moved, and I am often. And this was written for the summer solstice in 2016, and I thought perfect for us tonight. In the notes of lighterness and light and lightness. And it's called A Day the Sun Stood Still. Today, a day unlike any other, past or future. Not because the sun will stand still at the Tropic of Cancer, then reverse its northerly arc and head radiantly south toward the Tropic of Capricorn. Not because a full moon, a native, votive, strawberry moon will, just once in most of our lifetimes, rise on the same plane. Today is a day unlike any other because it's a new day of light, lightness, rareness, wonder open to one, to all. A day where our own stillness can greatly illuminate, where we can choose to move likewise, clock or counterclockwise, in phenomenal directions, can invoke a fresh season, infusion, green summer of self, bring ripening to our life seeds, fruits, vines, visions, connect more deeply, simply to the earth, to the purely elemental shining inside, around, and above us. A day the sun stood still. Now, sometimes in these evenings, I like to bring in a thought or quote or something from another poet, and I was thinking about all this, musing on all this morning, and said, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who's still alive, I think, at 104, out in San Francisco. Amazing. And he wrote a much longer set of thoughts on this. It's called What is Poetry? A Non-Lecture was his title. Rough draft on an Ars Poetica delivered on the occasion of his receiving the Frost Medal. So I just pulled out a few lines from it, because there are many. And what is poetry? Love lie with me, and I will tell. Poems like moths press against the window, trying to reach the light. Every bird a word, every word a bird, and bird song is not made by machines. It is a lamp of the imagination lighting up every darkness. Poems are lifesavers when your boat capsizes. It is a book of light at night dispersing clouds of unknowing. It is a wood boat moored in the shade under a weeping willow in the bend of a river in the deep south. Like a bowl of roses, a poem should not have to be explained. What is the use of poetry? If I have to ask, you need it. Poetry is the last refuge of humanity in dark times. Now that the new dark age of the Kali Yuga is upon us, poetry must burn brightest. Let a new lyricism save the world from itself. Thank you, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and how, even though written years ago, how apropos is that for our times. Lightness. I'm sure we all have thoughts about what that means or could mean, lighterness. Find that for yourself, because in being whole, it's important to feel everything, I believe, and let it flow through us, because it makes up, the light and the dark make the wholeness up. The light and the heavy and everything in between. And this is an invocation of a kind. I was walking in the old Dodge Estate in Madison, New Jersey a few years ago, and this poem arrived into me. In with the good air. In with the good air. With the good earth. With the good self. With this remarkably good life. This gift of being alive. Of being awake to the world around and inside. To all the goodness and lightness of this world, despite its sadness, darkness, to all the possibilities for living each day in states of greaterness, in states of gratefulness. In with the good air. I have a wonderful friend of decades and was a voice teacher for me when I was we'll just call it studying singing, and it was an extraordinary experience because she combined the Alexander technique with singing and integrating and allowing forth music, sound, song, in my case, song and poetry and everything else that's come out of me. And it was a very pivotal experience. And many years back, I wrote this poem for her about that experience of working with her, which had a lot to do with the breath, freeing the self and freeing the body. And it's called Your Tidal Breath for Jean McClelland. You're so petite and perfectly formed under my signet-ringed hand you've placed at the base of your diaphragm to touch your core. So at peace and perfectly free, your small breasts sweet plums, your black curls tumbling onto the table as the tidal breath of your deeper body rises and falls like a boundless ocean, silent and soulful. Talk about lightness of being. There was many experiences of that time. I was thinking of the lightness for us, which I'm sure some of us share, of dearly loving another. There's a lightness in that, a lightening energy. And I'd written this back in the Cyclades and summers ago on the island of Kea, which you've heard other poems about if you've listened in before. And this was for a love of the time. And the poem was While You Sleep. And they were back in the States. I was on the other side of the world. And so there were these two worlds happening at the same time, different time zones. While you sleep. I walk while you sleep. Swim while you dream. Turn my face to the sun while you turn yours to the moon. Drink dark wine as you drink dark night air. Listen to deep blue water lapping. Listen to your heart beating while you sleep. I was thinking too tonight for us of the energy of emerging from a darkness of inner life, or a sadness or some heaviness. And I wrote this poem called Mrs. Sisyphus. And if you know the myth, of course, Sisyphus was always rolling that stone up endlessly, eternally up the mountain. And it would roll back and he'd roll it up. I knew a woman once, loved a woman who, in her despair, in the long wedded welded to misery of her unfound, unmet intimacy, would take herself to the bank of a mighty river, where she would go to lament, to wail and hurl large stones into the deep, consuming currents. But however much weight she would cast off, there was always more, inside and around her, too much more, until one day, when she could begin to see her way, find her way out of her own dark labyrinth, her own sunken heartedness, when instead she began to cast light and lightness on the waters of her life. Mrs. Sisyphus. And that led me to the things that are always light and alight and illuminated inside of us, if we can get to them, or more often get to them, or see them, feel them, bring them forth. And that's our soul. And your poet here feels he's got a mission to be one of other poets of the universe's soulfulness. And this poem, going back to Central Park West some years back, spring of 2012, you can never lose your soul. You can lose your money, friends, your teeth, your temper, your appetite, your perspective, your nerve, even your way in life, but you can never lose your soul, your truest north, the reason for being, our reason for loving. I was going through all kinds of poems, some I hadn't seen in a long time. It's wonderful to unearth them again. And this was walking through the woods a few years back in a nature preserve, and it's a fluttering of doves. So it's the lightness of birds, our feathered friends. What could be lighter? I'm sure we've all thought of being them sometimes, just for a little bit. A fluttering of doves. A wing whistling of wood pigeons through the yellow, leaving trees that now autumnally mark my way through these woods. A soft fluttering of these birds I've always looked upon so gently, even sweetly. Their softness and innocence of plumage and visage. A grace note from nature as I enter another season. I didn't think we could leave out dreams as places of lightness for a lot of us. We're not talking about, obviously, nightmares, but the maybe polar opposite or other side of it, especially flying dreams, or dreams perhaps like this one, dreaming in Chinese. It hasn't happened yet, but I wonder what it would be like to dream in Chinese. Maybe induced by the smoke of lapsang souchong or the fire of rice wine, mi chui. Would I find myself standing on a corner in old Shanghai, singing a song to the moon in Mandarin, buying a bright-throated bird in the market, maybe a huahmei to stroll with, serenade my mornings, fishing for mottled carp from a low wooden boat on the Yangtze, dipping a brush to paint a mountain landscape, disappearing into the mist. The lightness of dreaming. And how about the lightness of parts of our childhood? I had this memory, and the poem came around it, of sitting with my dad in my early days, and he loved reading the comics in the newspaper. He called them the funny papers, as some of our grandparents might have. And he'd sit there, and of course, you loved listening to him sit on his lap. And if the comic strip ended, he would just keep going. He'd just make up the rest of it and go on for another 4 or 5 minutes about the whole thing. You knew he was doing it, but he was absolutely brilliant at it. And this is a poem that I wrote for him a few years back. He's not around anymore. Called The Funny Papers. And I put at the top an old poster of the Katzenjammer Kids, or Katzenjammer, from 1903. That was a strip of the time that was, I was way beyond that, but I just loved that idea of them. They were always getting to mischief. The Funny Papers, as my father called them. My dad at his most playful, making whimsy as I sat buoyantly, small boyishly, on his lap in our sunny Sunday living room. As he played out the comic strips, read the captions, all in the characters' voices, animated in turn in funny papered words, each little made large drawing. Both of us delighting in and between the lines. When the last frame came, he kept the story going, at first without me knowing, waiting till I caught his joking, and then how we would laugh together, like two Katzenjammer kids. And that's my dad. One side of him, anyway. He had many sides. I was thinking of the lightness of music and how that can take us to some wonderful places together, meaning you and others. And this is the Accordion's Song. This was written for a lovely fellow I'd met, an Englishman years ago, Tony Compton. I don't know where he is now. I hope he's well. And this was written in the spring of 2001 back in New York City. The accordion, the bellows of jaunty old French and Italian fellows, conjuring up left-bank cafes, smiling with lovers and handsome roués, breezy nights under striped awnings, soft candlelights. Old-world days we imagined living in, drinking in, days of berets and gay Parisians, of Fellini-filmed Romans and sun-skinned Sicilians, dancing days long gone, but suddenly recalled by the sweet and carefree breathing of an old accordion song. And it's funny, an accordionist friend or musician, painter, Renaissance man I know has brought the accordion back into the picture. Richard Allen up in Maine. How about the lightness of our memories and revelries? So, newer friend of mine was telling me a story about her mother back in the day when she was growing up, who had a sister who was an Ursuline nun, and talked about her mother having the nuns over for drinks. And I thought that was the most incredible image in my mind. And mise en scène, I said, a poem just started coming right off the bat about it. So this is for her and her, quote, superior mother, called They'll Take Manhattans. And most of us know that was a cocktail at the time, so we're playing around with that. And I make a very good one myself. They'll Take Manhattans. Also about the song, right? We'll take Manhattan. The Bronx and Staten Island, too. They'll take Manhattans. And no Bronx sidecars, too, or Brooklyn loggers. For the sisters, the Ursulines, you said, led by Sister Lucina Joseph, who'd gladly and gaily, regularly gather round your mother's table back in the day, on Ledgetree Street in Medfield, Mass., in their well-starched habits, dangling rosaries, and drink Manhattans, and praise the Lord with their holy spirits lifted and their laughter filling the late Sunday afternoon air. They'll take Manhattans, those Ursulines. So, lightness. What are other places I thought about we could think about, feel about, especially feel about it? Are places that we've traveled to that brought lightness to our spirits or bodies or both. I spent lots of different times in Italy, many parts of Italy, and This was a early September, end of summer in Positano. This is the road to Positano. Breezing through groves of olives and lemons, through vineyards and resinous pines, around netted cliffs and salty coastline, breezing down into Positano, layer-caked town, spumone sul mare, soon stepping onto the stony black shore, then into a red fishing boat and afloat, to a secret sea place sparkling below a cliff, and the shush of clear water over cooled, smooth pebbles. That was quite a lot of lightness there. The lightness of light and autumn light, for example, and the landscapes. And this was written out in East Hampton on the South Fork of Long Island some years back, not too many years back, a couple of years, 2 years. La danse verte, the green dance. The lines of evergreens, youngest and smallest to oldest and tallest, on stage, en pointe, in the clear autumn light, dappling through the parting clouds, in the cool autumn air flowing round their outstretched limbs, all dancing, this woodland morning, not nutcrackerly or balanchinely, just naturally, and so ecstatically, and so lightly, as if they might lift off in a breath from the earth, so evergreenly, as if to say, with their gesturing, rapturing bows, this is aliveness. The green dance. We definitely have to talk about clouds tonight, if we can, if I might. Just looking at them, of course, lying down as we've done over our lives, and maybe as children and as adults and others, just up there in reveries watching them. And this was written out in Sag Harbor. I did a residency, a poet in residency there. Wonderful time. Dear friends let me do that. And I'd been there many other times, of course, and I was just musing on their beautiful landscape and gardenscape and the clouds. And this is from my dear Angus and Laura Lee Bruce, June of 2016. So 4 years back, then, now, a month from now. Clouds. Pale pink clouds of mountain laurel float through the idle afternoon. Above the Hockney blue pool, fingers of French lavender, a nonchalant nude, a circus of hibiscus, between tall sways of scrub oak filled with wind, soft cones of arbor vitae, cream cups of dogwood, the rest descending delicately down and disappearing into the green dark woods. Clouds. On the same note of floating reveries, Things That Can Fly is the title of this next one. It's the lightness of flying, even if it's not dreaming time, it could be waking time. And this was for my dear New Zealander friend and soul brother Henry Hargreaves, on the relaunching of his wonderful studio in Brooklyn. Things that can fly, that can travel through the atmosphere or beyond it without touching the earth. Birds and hot air balloons, clouds and butterflies, zeppelins, rockets, long-tailed comets, and men like Henry, who have a rare and natural buoyancy, a lighter-than-air quality that allows him, to defy all usual gravity and lift off, to fly, take flight on the wings of big dreams, heart desires, and us to marvel at how such things are possible. there was a man back in time, and I know it's a bit debated, but he really was the father of modern flight before the Wright brothers. And he was a balloonist. And he was half French, half Brazilian. And if you don't know about him, there's a wonderful book, Man Flies. It got me very excited about him and his story, and led to this poem. So, the lightness of flight, of fanciful and otherwise. And this is called The Belle Époque Aéronaute, for Alberto Santos Dumont, the real father of aviation. Dandy Santos Dumont, flying his yellow silk demoiselle over the summer gold treetops of old postcard France, or steering his beloved little Brazil and its floating red banner over the fashionable hats and houses of Paris, landing on the terrace of a favorite cafe, then lifting off like a champagne bubble after lunch with his Panama hat, high collar, and elegant mustache. I would have liked to have known that fellow. It's also the lightness. I know we've all lost people in one way or another, literally or figuratively, and I was a wonderful man. That's the father of a very, very dear old friend of mine, Andy Reid, and his father's nickname was Bruto, B-R-U-T-O, Bruto Reid. He was wonderful. He was an old schooler, and after he died, I wrote this poem because I had one of the most resonant memories of him one night, and this poem is Hail and Farewell for the passing of Bruto Reid. To that great Gatsby gent I first met on a dark lawn, cooled with night air and starlight, standing savoring the fine evening with a blue pluming cigarette and smoking jacket, savoring his country kingdom. To that old school gent, sailed off now into those stars, into a greater lightness, into a greater peacefulness. So now we've come to the end of our evening together. Time for now together, and just a few last pieces, and including a blessing. Take the light path, the light of footpath, the light of heart and mind path, a bright, inviting, life-dappled, love-leafed path, a whole soul path, sunlighted by day, moon lanterned by night, open to you, ready for you, calling you there. The light path. And just before our last piece of the evening, I have a wonderful two goddaughters. One is a lovely French woman now. My goddaughter Axel, who I believe is in Montana right now, actually. On the 21st anniversary of her baptism, where I sang Pennies from Heaven, actually, on that occasion. And I wrote this for her. I love writing poems on her birthdays and baptism anniversaries, and this was back in 2020 of this year, January. Like a ship. The way from ancient times Greeks wreathed their heads with olive branches, drank wine and poured water on a new vessel as a blessing, honored and called on the gods to protect it and their seafarers. Each year since your christening, when you were set out on life's wide open waters, I ask too for the graces of the heavens and the earth to keep you safe, to help you sail with ease through your days and nights, the sun and stars, to let the elements favor whatever passage you choose to make, to bring you good fortune and carry you wisely and well to each next welcome harbor. Like a ship, for my dear Axel. And last, to leave us on the lightest note I can think of is actually a poem that was written at the winter solstice. Let there be lightness. To dispel all darkness, all heaviness. Let there be waxing toward all things lightening, all things humanizing. Let the world turn back to itself anew. The stopping sun return back aglow. Hope burn hot and bright in eager hearts. Let us, as nature's creations, remember its sacredness, and bring to life and each other the great sparks of soul that shoot and shimmer within our earthliness. Thank you for listening, and for your welcome donations by PayPal and Venmo that help support these programs and poetic arts, but especially most for your enthusiasm. Replays of all these broadcasts are online to share or hear another time. I hope you'll lean in again. Until then, good days, soon summer days ahead, and good spirits.